Let's dig more into the goings on in Washington right now. We bring in Ed Mills. He's Raymond James Washington policy analyst. Ed, it's good to talk to you always about all things Washington. I mean, is this a once bitten, twice shy situation? Should the markets and Americans, period, have learned by now that stimulus ain't coming, or at least it's not coming until we seat the next Congress?
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, this has been a really frustrating thing to follow because a lot of the normal pressure points, those forcing mechanisms, just has not produced a bill. We are still in the camp that we are not in a discussion of if, but more of when and how much. I think the fact of the matter and what we are seeing is the longer this goes on, the lower the price tag ultimately is. I do think the best chance to get it done is in this next week. I do think it is a positive development that they have moved the government funding deadline from December 11th to December 18th, or are about to do that, giving an extra week for negotiations. We have a number of cliffs happening for Americans who are in desperate need of assistance in fiscal support for this economy that occur the day after Christmas or on New Year's Eve. Certainly, we hope that Congress is not in a situation where they go home for the year without providing that support in this kind of month ahead.
And I would ask, though, if we had had this conversation back in June or July, we would have said, oh, there's a bunch of cliffs coming up at the end of this month. And they kind of came and went, and the economy has certainly been more resilient, I think, than most folks expected. Do you think that lawmakers are maybe, certainly, perhaps some Republican lawmakers specifically, but I'm sure there's lawmakers on both sides thinking this way. They say, I'm not so sure these cliffs are going to be as devastating as perhaps might be suggested by some data.
You're absolutely right, Miles. And that's been part of the problem here, is that those normal forcing mechanisms have not worked. When I talked to members of Congress and their staff in September, after they came back from the August recess, people were really surprised at how little pressure was on them when they were in their home states, in their home districts. They thought there was going to be a groundswell of pressure on Congress after the July 34th deadline had gone and passed without that extra $600 a week unemployment benefit. That was alleviated somewhat by the executive actions of President Trump. What we are seeing now is the stories that I think a lot of people in DC had expected in August or September are coming now, as we are in a significant surge of COVID-19, as a lot of the savings has run out, as a lot of the activities that we've adjusted to are just not happening because it is getting colder out there. That pressure point is building. I don't know if it truly is enough just yet. I am more optimistic, but I think it is far from a done deal that this gets done. And with the fact that it's a government funding shutdown that could occur if this does not occur, usually that's enough. They didn't want to do that before the election for political reasons. After the election, a lot of those kind of normal calculations are off.
Ed, how damaging is it to American households that there will not, at least what we've seen right now, there will not be a new injection into their banking accounts? There is no stimulus check. How important is a new, fresh $1,200 check, and why can't this be included in that bill?
Yeah, Brian, it's a big debate here in DC. One of the things that we are seeing is that we've had a significantly uneven impact of COVID from an economic perspective. There are a lot of Americans who are in the same job that they were, making the same amount of money, and have had a limited economic impact of this pandemic. However, for those who are in the service industry, those who are making below $40,000 annually, it's just been devastating. So from an economic perspective, when I speak to our chief economist here at Raymond James, the goal is making sure those who are long-term unemployed get the support first. It would be a nice to have for a number of other households. It's just not as do or die from an economic perspective for them. If you do see that, we could see a repeat of what happened earlier this year. For the first time during an economic downturn, we saw discretionary spending actually go up. and that supported a lot of the industries. And that's part of the reasons why we are hitting all-time highs in the market, because Washington, D.C., between Congress, the president, and especially the Federal Reserve, stepped in and have provided a life raft between the current pandemic into a post-vaccine world.
And Ed, it's Julie here. Let's kind of switch gears and look a little bit further ahead as we turn now to President-elect Biden and the team he's assembling. We know now more about the economic team. We're getting reports now that Lloyd Austin is going to be his pick for defense secretary. When you look at that assemblage, what does it tell you about what the Biden administration is going to be like, and how much that is sort of going to trickle down into the rest of how Washington operates compared to how it's operated over the past 4 years?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference between what we are seeing with the Biden administration versus the Trump administration is these key selections are people who have had a career in the industry or in the agency that they are going to run. With Janet Yellen being selected as Treasury Secretary, that is a strong signal that the Biden administration plans to focus on the economic recovery. With a pick at DOD, one of the concerns in DC is that this is going to be the second time in a row for one administration to the next where a retired general versus a civilian military leadership is taking over control of the Defense Department. One thing that has been very notable so far in the picks is that there have been no potential political rivals in these selections. And so leading up to the election, there was a thought that everyone who was on the debate stage with Joe Biden was going to find a home within the administration. So far, no one that has been on that debate stage has found a home yet inside the Biden administration. I think that's really notable, and we will see if that continues.
Ed, are there any, as you talk to clients and folks in D.C., are there any surprises investors should be on the lookout for in the final weeks of the Trump presidency? With the markets trading at all-time highs, I suspect, or I think the market is not positioned for any more surprises from this administration.
Yeah, two things. One, China. There is a belief that Joe Biden would be able to overturn some of the last-minute China policies that some of the China hardliners in the Trump administration are pursuing. I don't think that will be a case. I think that Joe Biden is not going to want to use the political capital to walk any of that back. And number two, it's all about Georgia. It is hard to understate how binary the outcome could be there in terms of who gets confirmed in the Senate and what type of legislative agenda, especially on budget reconciliation, taxes, unemployment insurance, minimum wage, et cetera, that could be done with a 50-50 Senate, which would be a Democratic majority.
Ed, I want to come back to that interesting point that you made about no political rivals being named to the various Biden appointees. It's a really good point considering the rampant speculation, particularly surrounding Elizabeth Warren. What does this say about the status of the further left as we head into this new administration? Is it sort of a repudiation of the far left?
I wouldn't go so far as saying it's a repudiation. I think one thing that Joe Biden actually benefits by is that the Senate is going to come down to 1 or 2 votes. So if you are a Democratic senator who has a Republican governor who would replace you, you are just simply cannot be chosen at this time. That is true for Bernie Sanders with the Republican governor in Vermont, true with Elizabeth Warren with the Republican governor in Massachusetts. People will point to maybe one of the more progressive picks, someone who probably will have a difficult time getting confirmed in the Senate, Neera Tandem. And while she is viewed as a progressive pick, she also is someone who has feuded openly with Bernie Sanders and his supporters for several years. So when he has chosen someone from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, he certainly has chosen someone that is not fully embraced Bernie Sanders in his political agenda, in his support.
Interesting stuff. Ed, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. Ed Mills, Raymond James, Washington policy analyst. Appreciate it.